got to do. Fly.
Hey everybody, it's Devin with Cognito Moto, and today we're going to be showing you how to do a fork swap on this 1979 CB750. For this fork swap, we're going to be using a GSX-R 600 2011 fork. The procedure shown is going to be the same whether it's a GSX-R fork, Yamaha fork, or Honda fork. So the first thing we're going to have to do is take this exhaust off so that we can use the bike stand to jack the bike up. Alright, so now that I have the jack under the bike, I've got a little support on it, I'm going to take the top nut off and start dropping the forks. How the hell tighten that? Alright. There it goes. Alright. Now I'm just going to undo this top spanner. This stuff here is most of the time going to be the wrong size. The GSX-R is going to have a larger diameter thread, so this will no longer be used. Alright, now I'm just going to jack the bike up, and the fork's going to kind of work its way out. And the old fork's out. 2011 GSX-R 600 fork. Conversion bearings. Conversion stem. So fork's off, and what we're going to need to do is press in the Cognito Moto conversion stem for CB750. Depending on the bike and depending on the fork, there's a number of different stems that we offer and conversion bearings that allow you to adapt the new stem and new fork into the old bike. All right, so this is the original GSX-R lower with the stem currently in it. The conversion stem, I'd say in this case is roughly about a ½ inch longer. So just simply placing the GSX-R stem in here, you can see that this is where the bearing goes. This is the bearing seat. So if we were just to run it as is, the bearing would be sitting on the threads and there would be no way to tighten it up. So we need a longer stem, and that's what we have here with the conversion stem. All right, so to press the stem out, the stem is pressed out going this way. To create proper support, we just use a great big socket. It clears the bottom of the original stem, and then that way when you apply the pressure, this is properly supported. What you don't want is to do something like this and push, because you'll bend this. You know, as you apply pressure, it's just going to bend the lower clamp. So to avoid that, we just use the socket, set it under there, and now the center is properly supported and nothing's going to bend. Let me know if you get my shot. And don't forget your safety glasses. This is actually just it's a 20, I think it's a 20-ton hydraulic press from Harbor Freight. Nothing special, but it gets the job done. There it goes. Once it gets that initial break, it moves pretty easily. This is also a good way to get the old outer race off. Alright. So here's the new conversion stem, and this is the old stem, and you can see there's the length difference. We just use regular old grease to do pressing, so you don't get as much galling. You know, it is aluminum on aluminum. It's got a groove here. That's not directional. It doesn't matter which way that goes. It's just a anti-rotation for the spanners. So for the next part, pressing the new stem in, we want to support it right here. Right, we want to get support as close as we can to the center so that we don't bow this back the other way. And for this, we just have these blocks. Presses, they come with different things, but we just use these aluminum blocks. It just fits right in there. We just use a socket. Give it a little support. You'll feel its seat, the pressure will start to increase and it won't be moving anymore. So the next thing we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to remove the old outer races. These have to come out. You're gonna use the new outer races from the All Balls kits that was included with the stem. So to do this, I just have this piece of aluminum, you know, just a long rod. A screwdriver will work, you know, whatever you got. And you can catch the lip back there and just give it a couple taps. Kind of work your way around. Now we need to remove the lower outer race. And that one's a little more tricky because you don't have a whole lot to catch. You don't have a big lip there to grab onto. All right, so I got a long shaft. Hold on. So here's the new conversion bearings for the bottom. We're gonna go ahead and put this in, the lower, you know, this comes apart. We're gonna put this in, and then we're gonna see how many washers are needed to clear the bottom of the steer tube, to clear under here. And these are included with the bearing. We wanna go ahead and pack the bearing with grease before we put it onto the shaft, because it's going to be impossible to do it afterwards. All right, so here we have a small arbor press, and we're going to use this to press the bearing onto the stem. So onto the shaft, we're going to put the spacer that we determined we needed back at the bike. I'll put that on first, and then we're going to put the seal. It's included with the bearing, and then we're going to put the bearing. All right. If you don't have a press, you know, we've done this before, just take a piece of tube, slide it over, You know, make sure you're not crushing the threads, but you know, you can tap this on. It's not a heavy press, so it is doable. All right. Now we're going to go ahead and pack the top bearing. All right, so now that we have the bearing installed, we're going to go ahead and push it through the neck. All right. So on this part, you're going to want to use the components from the GSX-R, from the donor fork, moving forward. Typically, the spanners, the top nut, none of that stuff is gonna work because it's all going to have to be fork specific. For the spanners, you're going to want to use torque specs from the donor fork. For this, the first nut is to set the tension for the bearings, and the second spanner nut is to lock it down. So you're going to want to use both. So now you can put the top clamp from the donor fork, and then you want the top nut from the donor fork as well. So in this case, the ignition tabs are hitting the steer stops from the original bike. We're probably not going to use this. You would have to grind this off, but we're just going to replace this with one of our clamps. They're not required, but it just looks better. So we're just going to replace it with one of our top clamps just to make it easy for this demonstration. We also make retro nuts to fit the GSX-R fork, R6 fork, CB-R fork. Just has a different look to it. And you're going to want to torque this down to OEM specs as well. So because the original stem from the GSX-R is about 1/2 inch shorter than the replacement conversion stem, the longer the stem is, the further down on the fork tube this lower clamp is going to clamp. On a GSX-R, this isn't an issue typically. There's a flat surface here, from here to here, that the lower clamp needs to clamp on, and that's a straight surface. Up here, it starts to taper in, and you can't clamp on that surface, and you can't clamp on this surface down here. Most bikes it's okay. Some of the longer stems, like the Nighthawks, the 90s CB750, the stem is much longer, so that becomes an issue because the stem is longer, it's pushing this lower clamp effectively down. So in those cases where the lower clamp is being pushed too far down, we make drop upper clamps to bring the fork tubes down and correct the added length from the conversion stem. You might also want to use this if you want to keep fork lengths the same. That'll effectively lengthen the fork. It's not as critical as a fork offset, but you know, it is an option out there if you need it. All right, so we've got the fork mounted. This is a stock GSX-R lower, and you can see the steer stops aren't the same from the GSX-R and the CB750. So, you know, either you're gonna have to cut this off and add a longer one, or do something here to create stops. Otherwise, you know, you're just gonna hit the tank. All right, so we offer fixed offset triple clamps, and they're for a number of reasons why you would want to use it. One is cosmetic. You know, it just looks better than the OEM Gixxer clamp. The other option that comes on all of them is that the steer stops are adjustable. So instead of having to grind and weld on your frame or your lower clamp, you know, you can just loosen these guys and set it where you need it, you know, to where your forks don't hit your gas tank. So the last thing we wanted to talk about is fork offset. So fork offset is center line of your fork tubes to the center line of your steering stem. On a GSX-R and most modern forks, inverted forks, you're gonna have a 30 millimeter offset. So from here to here is 30 millimeters. So the thing to know about wheel size is that, let's say you're running the original 19-inch wheel. This distance should be 50 millimeters or 55, 60, depending on the bike. So we offer, and this is an OEM replacement, is the same fork offset. We're just gonna use this because it's easier to show. So this is a 50 millimeter offset for a 18-inch wheel, and this is a 30 millimeter fork offset. So as wheel size increases, you want to increase your fork offset, and what that does is corrects your trail. If you run a 30 millimeter fork offset with a 19-inch wheel, the bike is going to be more inline stable, less nimble. So in other words, it's going to take more effort to get the bike to lean. In order to correct that, you need to increase fork offset. To do that, we offer complete triple clamps. So this pushes the offset out for the top and the bottom equally, and that'll correct your trail. So, you know, it's not something that is required, but to optimize handling of your new fork, you want to correct the offset and make sure that's correct. Again, if you're running a 17, the stock Gixxer fork offset will be fine, or R6 or CBR. 17, 30 millimeter offset, that generally works fine, and that's correct. If you want to run a larger wheel, let's say an 18, you're going to want to go with an increased fork offset. Kind of a broad, quick intro into fork swaps. You know, this will get your fork mounted. Doesn't cover the wheel. We'll probably do another video to get into that, but that pretty much covers everything you need to know about, you know, swapping your fork and using our components. Skinny if I turn this way.